Cooking for my husband's family every night while pregnant was exhausting, and when I stopped, they said I was overreacting. Pregnancy, it's supposed to be a time of joy, right? At least, that's what I thought before I found myself completely overwhelmed, physically drained, and pushed to the limit in ways I never imagined. I thought I had it all figured out. The idea of starting a family filled me with excitement, but what I didn't realize was how quickly everything would change once the reality of it hit. It started out small. Some extra help around the house, maybe a little extra cooking here and there. But over time, the pressure to keep up with everything started building. My husband's family, who lived nearby, would often drop by. I didn't mind at first. I was happy to have them around. But soon, they began to expect more from me. More than I ever thought I could give. By the time I was deep into my pregnancy, it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. It wasn't just about carrying a child. It was about trying to please everyone. And the hardest part? It was the daily expectation that I would cook dinner for my husband's entire family every single night. I tried to keep my frustrations buried. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. But as the days went on, I could feel the resentment building. The exhaustion was wearing me down, but I kept going. Until one night when something inside me snapped. And that's when everything changed. When I first found out I was pregnant, I felt this overwhelming sense of excitement. I was ready to embrace this new chapter, and I wanted to make everything perfect. I thought about how I could create a warm, loving home for my growing family. I wanted to show my husband that I could not only be a great wife, but also the kind of person who could cook delicious meals and bring everyone together. So, when his family came over, I jumped at the chance to cook for them. It felt like a way to bond, to show I cared, and to make everyone feel welcome. At first it was fun. My husband would always praise my cooking, telling me how amazing everything tasted. It felt good to hear that, like I was doing something right. And honestly, I enjoyed the feeling of nurturing everyone, seeing them sit down at the table, chatting and laughing over a meal I had prepared. I remember the first few weeks, everything seemed manageable. The cooking, the cleaning, and everything in between. It was all a little bit exhausting, but still exciting. I thought I could handle it, that I could do it all. But then, as the days turned into weeks, reality started to set in. My pregnancy wasn't just a time of growing excitement, it was also a time of growing exhaustion. The more I cooked, the more I realized how physically draining it was becoming. I wasn't just cooking for my husband, it was his entire family, his parents, his siblings, cousins, you name it. It started out as a few nights a week, but then it became every single night. I could feel my body wearing out, my energy slipping away, but I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle it, or worse, like I was complaining. And that's when things began to shift. The excitement slowly started fading into frustration, and the weight of everything was starting to get heavier. It wasn't just the cooking anymore, it was the constant expectation. I could feel the pressure building, not just physically, but emotionally too. I loved my husband's family, but something inside me was starting to break. It wasn't just about cooking, it was about what I wasn't saying, about the things I was starting to feel but didn't know how to express. As the weeks passed, things started to shift in a way I never expected. What began as a couple of dinners here and there turned into an unspoken expectation that I would cook every single night. And it wasn't just for my husband, it was for his entire family. His parents, his siblings, and sometimes extended family would all show up, almost like clockwork, expecting dinner to be ready. The more I cooked, the more they seemed to take it for granted. No one asked if I needed help, no one checked if I was okay. I was just expected to do it all. It was like I became their personal chef. I started feeling more like a servant than someone who was supposed to be enjoying this special time in my life. My energy was running low. I wasn't just tired, I was exhausted in ways I couldn't explain. But every night, the meals had to be made. It didn't matter how I was feeling, or how much I was struggling to keep up with everything. No one seemed to notice how drained I was, how much my body was begging me for a break. And every time I stood in front of the stove, I felt more and more like I was losing myself in this role of wife and chef. The physical toll was undeniable. Pregnancy was already making everything harder, the constant tiredness, the aches, and the nausea that never seemed to end. But on top of that, the hours I spent cooking every night were starting to break me down. My feet ached, my back hurt, and my body felt like it was operating on empty. I couldn't keep up anymore. But I didn't know how to stop. Then there were the comments. Subtle, but still cutting. My mother-in-law would mention how my meals could have been a little more exciting, or how I could have done this or that differently. It wasn't enough that I was cooking every night. I had to make sure it was perfect too. And then there were the little comments from my husband, who seemed to forget I wasn't just his wife, but a person who was carrying a child. "This is a big family," he would say. "We all have to chip in." But no one ever did. I didn't want to let anyone down, so I kept going. I pushed through the exhaustion, pretending like everything was fine. But deep down, I was struggling. I wanted to scream for help, but I didn't know how to ask without seeming like I was overreacting. I felt trapped in this cycle of giving and giving, but receiving nothing in return. There was one particular day that made everything come crashing down. I had been pushing myself for weeks, trying to keep up with everything, pretending like I was fine. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. My energy had completely drained, and I felt like I was running on empty. I woke up that day feeling sick to my stomach, nausea, dizzy, everything felt wrong. But there I was, in the kitchen again, standing over a hot stove, trying to make a meal that no one seemed to appreciate anymore. It hit me hard. I was struggling to even get through the motions. I could feel the weight of the pots and pans in my hands, but it was more than just the physical weight. It was like everything was crashing down on me at once. I felt dizzy, tired, and sick. Every step I took in that kitchen felt like I was dragging myself through it. And the worst part? No one noticed. My husband was in the other room, laughing with his family, completely oblivious to how much I was struggling just to make dinner. That's when it hit me. I couldn't do this anymore. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about my health, both physical and mental. I had been so focused on trying to keep everyone happy, making sure the meals were perfect, and that my husband's family felt welcomed. But at what cost? My body was telling me I needed a break. My mind was screaming for help, but I felt trapped. I realized I wasn't just running on empty anymore. I was on the edge of breaking down completely. I remember standing there, looking at the ingredients in front of me, trying to focus on what I was supposed to be doing. But all I could think about was how much I needed help, how much I needed a break. I had always wanted to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, and to be the one who could do it all. But that day, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I couldn't keep pretending. I needed help, and I couldn't keep going like this. The hardest part was the guilt I felt. I felt guilty for even thinking about stopping, for feeling like I couldn't do it all. I knew my husband's family had come to expect this from me, and I didn't want to disappoint them. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that continuing to push myself this way wasn't just unsustainable. It was unhealthy. I needed to put my health first, even if it meant disappointing others. I remember the moment I decided I couldn't keep going like this anymore. It was late one evening, just like any other, when I had spent the entire day cooking, cleaning, and trying to keep up with everything. My back was aching, my feet were swollen, and all I wanted was to sit down and relax for once. But instead, I was standing in the kitchen again, trying to prepare another meal for my husband's family. As I put the final touches on the meal, I took a step back and looked around at the table. There they were, my husband's parents, his siblings, all sitting there, waiting for dinner. And I suddenly felt this overwhelming sense of exhaustion wash over me. It was like the weight of the entire situation hit me in that one moment. I couldn't keep doing this. I needed to stop. Saying no was the hardest thing I had ever done. I had spent so long trying to please everyone, trying to make sure everything was perfect, and here I was about to disappoint them. But I knew I had to put myself first. I had to take care of my health and my well-being. I was pregnant, and I had to realize that I couldn't keep pushing myself to the limit. When I finally told my husband and his family that I couldn't cook every night anymore, I felt this knot in my stomach. I wasn't sure how they would react. I knew my husband would understand, but his family? I wasn't so sure. I tried to explain as calmly as I could, saying that I needed a balance, that I couldn't continue to be in the kitchen every single night while I was pregnant. I told them how important it was for me to rest, to take care of myself, and that cooking dinner every night was simply too much. The reactions were mixed. My husband was supportive, but I could tell his family didn't take it well. His mom, in particular, seemed disappointed. She said something like, "You're being a little dramatic. It's just cooking dinner." And I could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't what I wanted, but I knew it was necessary. I felt this strange mix of relief and guilt. Relieved because I had finally spoken up for myself, but guilty because I knew it wasn't what they expected from me. It was hard to shake the feeling that I was being selfish, but deep down, I knew I had to take care of myself. I had to stop pretending I could do it all, even if it meant stepping back and saying no for the first time. The moment I told my husband and his family that I couldn't cook every night anymore, the atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. At first, there was silence. You could almost feel the weight of everyone processing what I had said. Then, it all came out. Comments, accusations, and some shocked looks. It felt like the ground beneath me was shifting, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to stay grounded through it all. His mom was the first to speak up. She seemed almost offended. "You're being so dramatic," she said, her voice sharp. "Pregnancy is no excuse for being lazy." I could feel my stomach knotting up, but I stayed calm. It hurt, though. I was doing my best to explain that I was exhausted physically and mentally, and that I needed help, but it didn't seem to matter. All they saw was a wife who wasn't fulfilling her duties. One of his siblings chimed in too, adding, "You knew what you were getting into when you married him. Cooking is part of the deal." That comment stung. It made me feel like I wasn't allowed to have boundaries, that I wasn't allowed to take care of myself just because I was married and pregnant. It was like none of them saw how much pressure I was under. And then there was my husband. I watched his face as he absorbed what was happening. I was hoping he would stand up for me, but instead he seemed torn. He didn't say much, but his silence felt louder than anything. He didn't argue with his family, and that hurt more than I cared to admit. I wanted him to support me, to back me up and say, "We need to look after you too." But instead, he just sat there, caught in this strange middle ground. I could tell he didn't want to upset anyone, but at that moment, it felt like I was invisible to him. I couldn't help but feel frustrated and disappointed. How could they not see how hard I was trying? How could they not understand that my body was changing, that I wasn't just tired, but completely drained? Every night, I pushed myself to keep up with the cooking, cleaning, and trying to meet their expectations, all while carrying a baby inside me. Yet, none of that seemed to matter. The more they questioned me, the more I realized they weren't really seeing me at all. They saw a wife, a daughter-in-law, someone expected to do everything for the family. And I felt trapped in that role, like there was no space for my needs or my well-being. It was a harsh wake-up call, and the realization hit hard. I wasn't just physically tired, I was emotionally exhausted too. And instead of empathy, I was met with dismissal and judgment. That conversation left a pit in my stomach. I didn't know what to feel anymore. I had hoped for understanding, but instead, I felt like I had become the problem. And what hurt most was that I had to fight for something as basic as taking care of myself. It was a lot to process, and in that moment, it felt like everything I'd been silently holding in was finally being rejected. After everything that happened, I knew I couldn't just go back to the way things were. I needed to take control of my life again, especially when it came to my health. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but I had to learn how to set boundaries. It felt like a huge weight was lifted, the moment I realized that saying no wasn't a sign of weakness, but a way to protect myself. I couldn't keep pushing myself to the limit just to please others, especially when I was already carrying so much on my own. For the first time in a long while, I gave myself permission to rest. I started taking small breaks throughout the day, whether it was a quiet moment with a book, a short nap, or just sitting still and breathing deeply. These little moments of peace became my lifeline. I had to learn to say no to things that didn't serve me, like cooking every night for a family that wasn't considering what I was going through. Slowly, I began to feel more in control, more like myself again. Focusing on myself also meant focusing on my pregnancy. I started paying more attention to my body, listening to what it needed. I took the time to eat better, to sleep more, and to practice self-care. I didn't feel guilty anymore for putting myself first. In fact, it made me feel stronger, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And as I started to feel more balanced, I noticed that my relationship with my husband started to improve too. We had honest conversations about what I needed, and he began to understand that supporting me meant taking some of the pressure off. It wasn't perfect, but there was a shift. We were both learning how to better communicate, how to be more considerate of each other's needs. The hardest part, though, was dealing with my husband's family. At first, they didn't understand why I had to stop cooking every night. They thought I was being selfish or unreasonable. But over time, and after several tough conversations, they began to see things from my perspective. It wasn't about not wanting to help, it was about realizing that I couldn't keep giving everything without taking care of myself first. They didn't all fully understand at first, but eventually, they stopped expecting me to be the one to do everything. It was a slow change, but a necessary one. Looking back, I can see how much healthier I became once I started setting boundaries. I learned that it wasn't my responsibility to take care of everyone else at the expense of my own well-being. That was a hard lesson, but it was one that changed everything. It allowed me to be more present in my own life, more present for my pregnancy, and eventually more present in my marriage. It wasn't just about saying no, but about saying yes to myself. Looking back on everything, I realize how much I've grown through this experience. I learned some tough but valuable lessons that I'll carry with me forever. The biggest one was understanding the importance of self-care. It's easy to get caught up in trying to please everyone, especially when you're in a relationship and you're juggling so many responsibilities. But I learned that taking care of myself isn't selfish, it's necessary. If I don't take care of myself, how can I take care of anyone else? I had to learn that it's okay to recognize when enough is enough. There comes a point when pushing yourself too hard isn't a sign of strength, it's a sign of neglecting your own needs. I had to stop feeling guilty for not being able to do everything for everyone. The reality is, I was growing a tiny human inside of me. That was enough of a responsibility, and I had to honor that. It's about balance, being there for others, but not at the expense of your own well-being. Since I made the decision to set boundaries, things have definitely changed in my relationships with my husband and his family. It wasn't easy at first, but once my husband understood why I needed this space, our relationship grew stronger. We became better at communicating, and he started to really see the toll his family's expectations were taking on me. Over time, my husband's family began to respect my decision too. They didn't fully understand it at first, but they saw how much it helped me, and that made them realize they had to adjust. Most importantly, standing up for myself gave me a sense of strength I didn't know I had. I didn't just get through the pregnancy, I thrived. I felt more in control of my life, more confident in my decisions. It wasn't easy to say no, and I was scared of the fallout, but I'm so glad I did. I realized that my mental and physical health should always come first. I never imagined that something as simple as setting a boundary could change everything, but it did. And now, as I look back, I feel proud of myself for finding that strength. As I wrap up this story, I just want to remind you all of something important, especially for anyone going through a challenging time like pregnancy or any period of change in life. It's so crucial to put yourself first when you need to. Sometimes, we get so caught up in trying to meet the expectations of others that we forget about our own well-being. But your health, mental, physical, and emotional, should always come first. It's not selfish, it's necessary. Setting healthy boundaries and learning how to communicate openly is something we all need to do. It's not easy, and it doesn't always come naturally, but it's something that can make a world of difference. Don't feel guilty for taking care of yourself or saying no when it's too much. It's okay to prioritize your happiness and health, even if others don't fully understand at first. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you been in a similar situation? How have you handled family expectations or pressure? Leave a comment below. I'd really love to know how you've navigated these kinds of challenges. And if you enjoyed this video and want to hear more personal stories about life, relationships, and self-care, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be sharing more soon, and I'd love for you to join me on this journey.